If your practice is not growing, chances are it's not your marketing, your tactics, or your team. I just had one of the most insightful, inspiring, and impactful conversations with our guest on today's show, Jim Karagiannis, and he blew my mind about this one concept that he specialized his whole career now on, and that's the identity shift. Guys, I promise you, if you watch this episode, by the end of the conversation, you're going to think completely differently about your career and the impact you can have on people and how to get to that level. Now, back to the show. Welcome back to Practice Peak. This week, I have an incredible individual. And by the way, guys, me and Jim just talked about this before the recording. There is no structure to this, and you're going to get so much value from it because of that reason. I think these authentic conversations we're going to have about chiropractic leadership, identity, will really shift how people think about not just the well-being of their patients. I think more so to do with how they operate themselves as a person and the business and how they show up as a leader. So, Jim, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Stefan. And just to echo what you've just said, I have no idea where you've got a series of questions. So you've got a theme that you're working towards, but I specifically said, listen, don't give me a heads up. Don't let me overthink it. Let's create that organically. And sometimes we have a particular theme that we'd like to talk about, but the conversation takes us in a different direction. And with many of the interviews that I've done in the past, the ones where we just open it up, sometimes we get this magical diversion or the direction that works organically, which is actually where the conversation will evolve. So looking forward to where it'll go. I have no idea. So let's go.
I like that. I love that. And I know the audience is going to love you. I know that. But so this is what I've noticed, Jim, interviewing people like yourself and being in the space myself. Leaders, in my opinion, are not just born, they're made. Scar tissue and going through the motions of life and what life hits you. But what does for those of the audience, people who don't know much about you, if they've been living under a rock, can you tell us, I call it the origin story, but
Yeah.
how life started even before you were in chiropractic space, and maybe Jim as an age of 7 to 10, 7 to 14.
Okay. All right. So
Yep.
yeah, interesting age group. So with a surname like Karagiannis, there's a Greek background origin story. So my late mum and dad are from Greece, and they migrated, like many did, to different countries post-war. So they went to Australia, as my parents did, and they met and moved to Australia. And I was born in Australia, and then after about 6, 7 years, sorry, not after 6, 7 years, after a few years, they moved back. They just had a bit of trouble adapting. But then when they went back to Greece, they went, no, we're all in. So they went back to Australia again. And so I went back to Australia, I was about 7. And so I couldn't speak English at the time. It was a foreign language, and I was thrust into grade 1. And I had this, I was coming back from pack, and I found it really difficult because a lot of,
But do you remember it well?
yeah, I
Seven, not
do, I
speaking the
do.
language.
Yeah, totally, totally. Because interestingly, my dad says that as a child, I had this affinity to sing. Like I'd walk around, like at sub 7, like in Greece, around Christmas time, it's a really festive season. I'd go around to all these apartments and knock on the door and sing Christmas carols. And who could resist a little kid who's singing Christmas carols, right? I'd be on a bus and I'd be singing, and people were throwing money at me. It was phenomenal. And when we left to Australia, I lost that. And my dad said I never sang again, right?
Whoa.
And many of my friends will say, look, it's probably a blessing and that's okay. So it was never anywhere, but that voice was lost, right? And because it really was quite traumatic. And so I went into an environment where I felt like I was behind the pack. And my only pathway, my only way of bridging that gap was through identity, hard work, and just outworking everybody. And that's pretty much what it was. And I have clear memories of being a 7-year old and it really, sorry, 7-year old, and just not being able to communicate with anybody and finding it really, really frustrating. So I got into a lot of fights. I got in a lot of trouble. When you don't have the words and the you basically default to primal avenues. And so there were some critical key people along my path that were mentors, whether they knew that or not at the time, that really steered me towards the right path and the right direction. Some of them were eventually ended up being like in the physicality and the martial arts, and a lot of it was in education. And so I just had to outwork everybody. So that was the psychology that was downloaded into me, as well as a kid of a migrant. You just got to work harder than everybody else. And I used that as a badge of honor for the longest time. And that has always been my default. So I'm sure I could see, I'm watching you, you watching me. I'm going, he's stepped back. He's going, okay, I'm going to come back to you with this one. But it's true because that was a recurring theme in life for me is that whenever things got hard, I just take a bigger run up and work harder up until the point where I went, there's got to be another way rather than just working yourself into the ground. So
So many questions there.
I know. I'm going to pause and give you an opportunity to open up.
So many questions. Well, as someone who navigates the podcast, I have to. So we can tell the audience, please run this marketing strategy, and you're going to get new patients, or please adapt this growth strategy, and you're going to go through a cycle of growth. It's not really what I'm about because I truly believe, and this is why I think your message will resonate for a lot of our audiences. It has to come from inside out, this identity. And it's very important for the audience to understand who Jim was
Yeah.
before you had a title of a chiropractor, of
Yeah.
a consultant, of a business owner, and having that label that you identify with. So interesting. Can I share a story with you?
Go for
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
I came to the UK when I was 15, speaking zero
Okay.
English. And
Okay. So
this
yeah. So
podcast.
you know what I'm talking about, right?
Oh, that's why I was smiling half the time
Yeah.
because I resonated so much. I didn't go into fighting. I went into the way I knew how to communicate beyond the language, which was sport.
Yeah. Well, that was sport too, right? Sport as an outlet, as well as must. So there was a validation in sport because
Mm,
culture in the UK and Australia is, you're okay if you can play sport, we'll accept you, right?
yeah.
So that was a pathway. However, I wasn't discerning enough to go, no, and that's why I went down the martial arts and fighting route as well too.
Yeah, yeah. It resonates so much with me. But it makes me also think, um, when there's an element of diversity in your life, a lot of people would say, well, Jim, you stopped singing,
Hmm.
you lost the voice. Some of your friends thought, thank God for that. But
Yeah. Yeah.
that's another story for another podcast. But it's interesting how you took that as a positive and you just navigated that energy into, I'm going to outwork I'm not going to swear on this podcast, but
Yeah.
anyone out there
Yeah.
because this is what I had. And it's almost like you chose to control what you could control at a
Yeah,
time.
totally, totally. Because I've learned over time that I'm very grateful for having had that as a fallback. However, it had its limitations. And further down this podcast, we'll probably talk about the consequences of that kind of mindset and where that takes you. But at that time, that's what I could lean on because that's what gave me that, when they talk about controlling the controllables or having a level of autonomy, for me was like, I don't have the language, but I can learn that. Um, I don't have the skills in this area, but I will find those. So I think there has to be a level of tenacity. It has to level at that level of, in Australia we call it mongrel, that you have to have to actually go, I need to work through this because whatever's showing up here, I'm bumping into myself here. I need to find a way to work through this as opposed to just avoid it. So
Yeah.
that was the pathway. And interestingly, you know, I'm going to fast forward to say you talked about 10 to 14. That kind of age group was really interesting because I'd started to accelerate, started to learn, and I probably would have been about, I must have been year 7 or so, year 6, 7, and I walked into to the library, and this is a defining moment that really helped me understand the difference between just running myself into the ground and discernment because a librarian, really amazing librarian at the time, could see me coming in. So actually must have been year 7 because I was still because I could have access to the library. So I've gone in, and this librarian has seen me come in, borrow a whole stack of books, come back. A week later with another stack of books, going back, and she comes back and she could see what I was doing. I was starting at A, and I was trying to work my way through. I'd obviously subconsciously said, I'm going to read every book in this library. And what was interesting about that is that at home, my mum and dad didn't speak English, so I had to pretty much teach myself. And I started at A, B, and so this wonderful, beautiful librarian would have been in the 60s at the times comes over and says, "Dear, I can see what you're doing. I want to acknowledge and reward you for your effort. Can I show you some selective literature? Because between A and Z, there's a whole lot of rubbish in here. Let me show you the works that will open up your mind to a bigger world out there." And that was life changing because she actually helped. guide me beyond trial and error, using her experience to things that would support and meet me where I was at. So that was the 10 to 14-year-old Jim in terms of the intellectual level. But in terms of we talked about sport. That was the clash. There was a lot of racism that I used, that I was subjected to. I excelled in sport, but that's where I was actually getting into trouble a lot. There was a lot of frustration and anger as a backlog. And thankfully, I had another coach who directed me and said, dude, you got to channel this healthily because this will lead you down the wrong path. And so that's why I got into boxing and martial arts from a very young age and channeled that positively. So there were those two elements where I channeled the physicality and I channeled the learning in ways that were a healthy expression of that, as opposed to just folding from the challenges that came up.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing that, sir. It's actually a really fine line between some people ending up in prison versus a world champion in jiu-jitsu or boxing, right?
Pardon me. Well, that's exactly it. Because when I looked at my um, support group at that time, around that 14, 15-year-old age group, either of them either went to prison uh, for that, because they didn't have I guess, the person in their life at the time to direct them into a pathway. And I've said it many times that had I not had people in front of my way, I don't know if that was the path that would have gone to me. So I look at the synchronicity and I look at the structure and order and the direction of how my life turned, by being open to it as well. And yeah, I'm fully in gratitude for the people who showed up in my path that showed me there was another way to do things.
Oh my God, I've battled with this question for so long. How much of our success is luck versus intentional? And someone told me once, the harder I work, the luckier I tend to get. I
Yeah.
still don't know how much of it is.
Yeah, I've sat with that too, because I do believe in that, but that buys into that whole hard work mantra, which is self-fulfilling in and of itself. But I read this recently where you've got to look at sometimes and go, luck does play a part in it, because if you have an invention, like when they talked about it, and they're talking about the start of Microsoft, and Bill Gates, yeah, he had his intellect and talent, but he also had a level of luck because he was within the vicinity of a program that had a computer program that allowed him to channel his skills and tools and talents in there. So sometimes there's proximity, sometimes there's timing, sometimes there's an element of luck. And what I found is that when we stay in a totally linear approach where you think one plus one always equals two, and we don't open up to the possibility of things outside of ourselves, we never get to the one and one is 11, right? And so to me, I embrace luck, and I look at it, and I stay in gratitude and open to it, in the way that it's basically in the quantum field. I know I'm just going opened up another door in through there as well, but to me, that there's always alternate possibilities, and luck is when you're attuned to possibilities that are out there and you lean into those or allow them to come in.
Love that. I hope people are listening because if I only rely on luck, it typically means that I live a life that is not intentional.
Yep.
And my effort does not equate to anything. And if I only believe in hard work, I might be working really, 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 really hard, scrubbing a floor all my life. So you have to have this. I always think in life, neither extreme is true. The truth is typically somewhere in the middle of hard work and intention and luck. But I love that. Thank you so much because it makes me think now, and I haven't interviewed anyone that I so much relate to in the years that you did, because the three friends that I made week one of high school, it would have been when I was 15, were my best friends now, and they were my first mentors. One of them is like, he was a county champion for tennis, super nice guy. Literally took me under his wing and said, "Let me teach you English because you keep
Yeah.
saying yes and no to people, but you don't know what you're
Yeah.
saying it to." And
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and I think the librarian was that person for you, maybe. And then the second coach in jiu-jitsu, whatever you did. So okay, so what happens after 14?
Okay, so 14 to gosh, to what time? So give me a
Like
range.
what high because you go from this kid who's sometimes in trouble, sometimes keeps out of trouble to
Yeah,
now we consult on a high level. What's
yeah.
that middle?
So my family recognized that I had a high level of energy, and so I was
You
trained.
don't say.
No, no,
Your
high level of
girlfriend.
energy, and they figured, how do we keep this kid sane? So I was training two or three sports concurrently, at the same time. I was training basically martial arts. At the time, it was karate based. I was training football, as in Australian rules, and soccer. So I was playing AFL on a Saturday and soccer on a Sunday. And then that would run into cricket season. So I had one thing to another. And I look back on that time and I loved it. I was actually so productive. Going through high school, I actually would have a limited amount of time where I go, I have 2 hours to study this if I'm going to fit everything else in. And so I went, okay, let's just. So I got into a hyper mode of high performance, incidentally, because I had a whole lot of things that were really important. And one of the
This is
things,
before university. Sorry to
yeah, this is
interrupt.
before, yeah, and my family, like when we moved to Australia, the only thing that they said, listen, we would love you to be able to speak Greek, just to be able to communicate that. So it was the first language I spoke, and I speak it fluently now. And I went, okay, all right, I'll do that. And so begrudgingly, I went to language school in addition to, normal school in during high school. But because I wanted to play cricket, because I wanted to play football, I had to negotiate, and I'd say, listen, I want to play football Saturday. That's when language school is. Is there any chance that I could do? And luckily, the school had a Friday night version. It had a Saturday morning and a Saturday afternoon. So I would pick and change. I would go to language school for 4 hours a week, either on a Friday night or a Saturday or Sunday, depending on what season I was in. So I got really efficient and proficient in being able to really laser in and go, right, that's what I'm going to do. But this is a priority. I want to play sport. I'm not going to pit him up. I'm not going to, because it's too hard, I'm going to find a way. And so,
And negotiating, by the sounds of
and
things.
negotiating. And I always gave everybody an opportunity to say yes. But that's helped, but not from the, like it's really interesting because I'd love to, if we get a chance to talk about the when you talk about chiropractic, the selling, right? Because it's never to me about selling. Selling is about finding a solution that people can see that supports them as well. So I would always, I guess from the very early stages, I would get to the habit and go, this is what I want. This is what I'm prepared to do to satisfy the criteria. Are you open to that? And more often than not, I found people said yes because I'd thought about it. And so I wasn't trying to get out of something. I wasn't trying to sell them something they didn't want. I was actually trying to go, this can work if you're open to it. And so I learned that that's the art of win-win. If you took accountability and responsibility and went, I'm responsible for this, I'll find a solution. So that's what I did going into it. And then I got to year 12. I didn't I wanted to study chiropractic. As soon as I was clear that I had a path and a direction. My probably an origin story was that I was a sickly child. I forgot to mention that, and I went. I had care from, actually it wasn't a chiropractor. It was a bone setter, and that literally changed my health. Right, and so that led me to go, what is this? It led me to chiropractic, and eventually I went, right, I'm going to study chiropractic. I didn't get into chiropractic after year 12 because there were only, I think there were 50 places in Australia and New Zealand at the time.
Wow.
So this is into Melbourne. So I went and did 2 years of science and then transferred across to chiropractic. I finished high school in 1986 and didn't start chiropractic until 1989. And so those 2 years were just the pathway of me getting into chiropractic because I didn't get in there straight away.
Got you, got you, got you. Okay. Yeah, that really helps to it makes sense now from your origin story why you are the way you are and how your environment and your DNA has shaped you,
Mm.
which
Mm.
is amazing. And then we can go into the actual consulting and what you do now. But let's go back to this. Chiropractic doesn't have and selling. This is the
Yep.
like I cannot believe you said that word on the podcast, Chip.
Yeah, I did because fundamentally there was a book written ages ago, a guy called James Kouzes, Kouzes, not and it's talked about, it says stop selling, start leading. And that to me was so clear because a lot of the times we're trying to sell something that and we make it about us. But when we're leading, we're actually going from the front. So effectively, we're basically saying, "Here's what I feel is important for you. This is based on my opinion. This is what I'm finding. This is the space I'm going to lead into. This is what I'd like to present to you." So that was very helpful for me to understand that. And so another great mentor of mine, a guy called Ben Harvey, who runs he's one of the platforms I did my coaching accreditation through, said, um, selling is healing. And I went, what are you talking about? He says, selling is healing. And I went, I don't understand. He said, well, effectively, what you're doing is if you've got a solution to someone, you're helping them find a solution to that. So that's healing and therapeutic for you, as opposed to trying to give them something they don't need. So if you identify that they've got something that you can help them with, you're not selling them anything. You're actually offering a solution as a mother, father, brother, sister, or child you would to them, right? And I went, that's a game changer for me because if they don't need what I'm offering, then he said, look, it's not it's unethical, but that's the gap that people have. People think that I'm giving them something they don't need. But what if they do need that? And you've got something that's potentially going to life changing or transformative or adds huge value to their life, but they don't know about it. Are you going to get out of your own way and tell them about it? Or are you going to try and sell them something they don't need? And that was a really big distinction. And so I don't actually sell. I actually talk to people and find solutions to them and say, if I had a solution that could make, so if you identify something that's really important to someone and they love, one of my favorite questions when someone comes in to a consultation, uh, and I don't actively practice anymore, but I used to talk about, someone coming in and saying, "Hey, you've had this problem for 15 years. Okay, I get it. Just, I acknowledge you. Thank you for coming in. I'm just really, really curious. Why today?
I used to ask the same question.
Why today, man?
Can you share with the audience what typical responses you will get, especially if it's a 49-year-old man who's a construction worker or a
Yeah.
plumber?
Okay. All right. So this has happened so many times, right? So many times it's not funny. And so you say to them, okay, there's a 49-year-old guy who identifies with their ability to provide for their family based on how well they're functioning. And there's a psychology that says, I've just got to keep pushing through this. I've got to keep pushing through this. I've got to keep through this. And the moment that they can't, and they have an acute health episode or crisis that destabilizes their stability, their identity, their ability to provide for their family, that rocks them. And so, if for some reason they can't, they're not coming in with an issue that's here. We're talking about the emotional component behind that. Because what their biggest fear is not the level of pain, because they've been suffering through that. But what their biggest fear is, am I still going to be able to provide for my family? And so, for me, I would actually talk to them and say, okay, how can I support you to understand this better? So I'd say, look, I'm curious. You've had this for 15, 20 years. Why today? And they go, what do you mean today? Well, I said, you've been using painkillers, you've been doing this, you've been doing this, but why am I seeing you today? What's missing? What are you now no longer able to do? What's important to you that you're scared that you won't be able to do any further? And often these burly 49-year-old blokes will break down into tears and say, I'm scared that I can't provide for my family. I'm scared that if I won't be able to do this anymore. And that's the heart-centered empathy where you go, dude, I get you. I'm a father too. I've been a father. I understand what that's like. I feel there's a pathway and a solution for you moving forward, but we've got to change how you're going about this. So if I had a solution for you that would help address this today, but also help you improve and get better and be able to provide for your family, is that of value to you? And he'd go, yeah, just tell me whatever you need me to do.
Dude, you don't even have to do a report of findings after that.
No, no, no.
We do, we do, but you don't have to
No,
because
no, because and then effectively, but to me, of all the visits that I would love, like this going to be, people would say, often said to me, how you, chiropractic is the only thing you ever wanted to do. And it was for the longest time. And of those, my favorite consultations were always visit one, visit two. All right. As much as I loved adjusting, some people really get off on the adjusting. I love the communication because to me, the ability to change someone's perspective and worldview and version of themselves is just phenomenal. I love that. And that's not to take away from an adjustment because I feel that an adjustment is the doing part. But sometimes opening up the frame and the paradigm and the worldview is so much more important in my mind. And so that's how I've gotten to do what I do, where I focus on the pointy end of the plane and help focus on the people who do the delivery of chiropractic in a more scaled level than I ever could by virtue of opening up the refractory periods in their minds.
love
So to
that.
me, that's what I find really exciting. That's what juices me up more than probably anything else.
Yeah, I mean, totally relate to it now we talk about it in an unscripted way, which is why these conversations are
Yeah,
beautiful when they do take place. The number of times you will see that paradigm shift, and you know when it happens, because there's this like fraction of a second when they have to think about something they haven't thought about before
yeah,
when you ask that
yeah,
beautiful question. So if there's anything you guys take from this interview with Jim is that day one, day two, being super intentional with we're not speaking to a new patient, we're speaking to a person who has fears, who has desires. I still think being afraid of something is more of a trigger for them to change their behavior than going towards pleasure at that stage of their
yeah, totally,
patient journey.
totally. Because you look at the types of motivation, is it a moving away from, of a moving towards? And most people aren't thinking about that time. There'll be a flip. And so sometimes, um, you know, um, the the gap is often we've got a paradigm. We're trying to commute with someone, but we're not meeting them at the level that they're at and raising them a level. So it's important that we meet where they're at and illuminate the path. But if the message to where they're at is too far, there's a mismatch. They're never going to be able to follow. They can't relate. There's no frame or concept for them to be able to latch onto because right now they're focusing on that. Martin Harvey, a colleague of ours from Australia, talks a lot about that when he says whenever you communicate, if your message is way far from where they're at, it's not going to work. So you've got to meet them where they're at and a stage above to guide them through it. And as they get that level, then you up level the level and the quality of the communication. But that's an important factor. Meet them where they're at. Is
Yeah, I love that. Just literally, I was just on a call with a clinic, and one of their associates um, said, "Oh, one of my reported findings didn't commit financially. They didn't even actually start care." And we looked at their case and we looked at their spine, and the poor lady, she was 70, she needed it. She could barely walk. And he said, "Well, we forgot to give her the what to expect. We have this like systems that we install in clinics, the what to expect booklet, which gives you the care
yeah.
plan or the prices for transparency. And the CAs forgot to give it to her from day one to day two." And I said to him, "Dude, it was your fault. The
Mm,
patient should have not had such a shock that there's not going to be a quick fix if
mm,
she's 70 and she's had the problem for 40 years.
mm.
You should have been transparent with her. It should have been come from a place of empathy and curiosity. Um, oh, there's so much we can talk about. But let's go back into
Wait. Oh, you just opened up. Can I just tell a really quick story and then we'll go through here?
let's
So
do it.
people have this perception, right? Because we used to run a wellness practice back in Australia, and it was very geared towards health expression, optimization, and peak performance. And I was running a talk in our practice one day, and it was the end of the session, and then basically, adjusting and then straight into the talk. And the last person that I saw was someone who used to come into the office for many, many years before we took over the practice. And I was looking after her for 15 years as well. So she would have been 75, 80, 75 or something around that age. And she loved playing lawn bowls, right? That was her thing. And so Mary was the last person of the session, and I've said, "Hey, Mary." She goes, "Oh, you've got to talk here." I said, "Yeah, it's about peak performance and being the best you can be in your sport. More than happy to come along, Mary." And she goes, "Okay, I think I might." So she sat in on the talk, talked about peak performance, health expression, getting the best out of yourself. And she got adjusted. I say, "See you next time, Mary," which would have been about a month's time. About a week later, Mary's in. And I said, "Okay, Mary, this is out of schedule. What's going on?" She goes, "I thought about your talk and I want to be the best I can be. Um, I don't want to give an edge to the younger bowlers." Now, the younger bowlers would have been 70 at the best, but we sometimes assume that they're this and they may not get it. And it's not about us. To me, it's like you just said, it's like give them the information, connect it to their values, connect them to something. If you can link your product and service to something that they want, then you'll find that decision making process is so much better. You don't have to convince them. They're going to integrate that in their own mind through their own values in terms of whether it's a priority or not. And then you're off to the races. So I wanted to share that because sometimes we have an assumption that just because someone has the money that they have the priority. And sometimes just because someone doesn't have the financial capacity, they're not going to find it because it's an important factor for them.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. And also on the flip side of that, have you heard of the term, what is it called in psychology? Cognitive dissonance?
Cognitive dissonance, yeah, the ability to have two opposing views at any one time. and have the capacity to hold them and look at both views from the from both perspectives. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we do our internal training, and I say to the guys, like a person will come with this belief, and the belief is here, and your belief about health and how you see the human body is here. How do we bridge that gap
Yep.
so the patient doesn't have to feel like they're selling or convincing? It's genuinely from a first principles thinking the truth that they
Yep.
just didn't know it existed.
Yep.
And if you can reverse engineer that on your day one, day two,
Yep.
your job becomes so, which is why it's exactly like you. I used to love day one, day two. It used to
Yep.
be such a transformational process. But Jim,
Yes.
what do you do now? We're going a few years ahead.
Okay.
What
Okay.
do you do now?
So we, Bettina and I, my wife, my lovely wife, I met her in chiropractic college, started dating week 10 of first year, 1989, and we've been together ever since. We got married in fourth year. So back in 92. So we've been married for since that time. And once we graduated, we flew, we relocated to different parts of Australia, went to regional Australia, set up a whole chain of practices in country Victoria, country New South Wales, I should say, which is a
Just the
state.
two of you, or you had
Yeah,
investors, or you
the two
had.
of us. No, it was the two of us, and we had a team of associates and a groups of associates. Um,
What did that look like? Because you
well,
just
actually,
dropped like a massive sentence, and
okay, so
sometimes people never
let me
achieve that.
backtrack. Let me backtrack. Sorry, because I did jump in there. So when we first graduated, we went up to I'm from Victoria, which is the if anybody who's not sure, the bottom part of Australia in one of the eastern states. We got a associate position, which was like the top end in Darwin, which is like the top part of Australia, and in that first year of practice, we literally just bolted and got out of the gate, and I used that gusto that I talked about from a young child very early on, and worked 7 days a week because the opportunity was there, and it was like I was in the main practice for 3 days, 4 days, and I was on the road flying on planes to remote areas of the country. It was just insane. Seven
Wow.
days a week, I did that for about 12 months, and in that first year, I exceeded every parameter that I expected. All right, smashed it out of the park in a massive way. But I was so burnt out that I actually wanted to walk away from chiropractic, right? Because to me, achieving the outcome, I achieved the outcome. I thought that I achieved the outcome. And when I finally got there, I thought I'd feel different, and I didn't. I felt burnt out and exhausted. I wanted to walk away. So I then learned about the importance of fulfillment as opposed to just achievement for achievement's sake. So that kind of planted the seed for how I wanted to do things. So then when we moved, we opportunity came for us in another state, and we just expanded. We saw it was we bought a practice in the middle of a country town in the middle of one of the worst droughts they ever had, and I just talked up a story. I said I'm going to make it rain. And literally, we had we within a short period of time, we worked out the reason why we went to this town was we went to the Bureau of Statistics and found out that it was the feeder town to all the regional towns. And if everything else went down, at least this town would stay afloat. So what we did,
Jim, how old are you then?
26.
You realize that's not normal for 26-year-olds to be looking at the statistics of where the traffic is coming from, and this
Uh,
is this is
I don't
crazy.
know. But that's probably it. Could be not normal. It could be sometimes you just don't know what you shouldn't know and don't know what you do know, and but this one was like logically was like, okay, how do we saw that this practice was sale, and we wanted to find. I didn't know anywhere. I'd never been to this town, so we just flew in, had a look at it, and went, okay, it's not run anywhere the way we want, but let's go. And we flew into this town, and that's an element of when you talk about luck, is because luck's also when you step into through
Their
that black door of
opportunity.
uncertainty and opportunities, and you create some of it. That's the part that I believe, right?
Mm.
Where
Mm.
you go, I've got this moment, I can actually go left or go right. I'm going to step through the black door of uncertainty and see where that takes me. That takes courage. And that then opens up luck and opportunities. People go, hey, you're really lucky. Like, was I, or was I prepared to take the step that no one else wanted to? So yeah, we then bought out a practice, and then what we did interestingly is we found out that the main practice had pretty much 8 or 10 surrounding suburb towns that would feed into it, and they were significant. You could have a decent enough practice in those locations but it was very underserviced area, and people would come in to town once a year to do their annual shop and come into the practice. And so we only there for like a month, and then I realized there's a lot of people that are coming from outside this region. What if we found a solution for them? And so effectively within the month we did we went to the bureau and found out the local statistics, but then we did a survey and found out from people that the only reason why they're coming in once a year was purely that they'd have to drive 400 kilometers, stay in town, get adjusted, and then drive home. So we went from a model of what if we brought that to you? And so we went from a town practice where we might see them once a year to we initially went out and said, okay, we'll be out here at a minimum of once a month. We really should be seeing you once and twice while we're here today and tomorrow. So we literally went from seeing someone once a year to 24 times until we could actually establish our satellite practices in those areas. And that's what we did. So
And you
we
had how many practices did you end up with?
seven, we
Seven
had
practices in a
seven,
time space of
6 years.
that's aggressive.
Yeah, it was very aggressive, but also we ran it in a way that was very lean as well. So effectively, what we did is that we went a different route. We didn't go through the capital raising pathway. I now do that, right, in different areas, and we'll get to that part of the story. But at that point, it was just, hey, it's just me and you, babe. Let's go. Let's do this. And that was it. It was running them lean. As soon as they were profitable, we could start the next one. And that was the pathway.
And you didn't run them as
They'll run as
franchise models.
no, they were all run by us centrally, and we had associates in those areas. And yeah, that's pretty much how we ran those. But that's how we started them from scratch.
Love that. And
Yeah,
what was the if someone is listening now and they're on one practice or they're thinking about opening the second one, knowing what you know now, with all the scar tissue you built, because it all sounds amazing. This guy built 7 clinics, and I don't think people also know the hardship that you probably went through and the headaches that you
yeah,
had to go through.
yeah.
What would you do different?
Look, so much, a lot. Like, I mean,
How long do we have?
yeah, like, is it like, y- there's there's different things. Like, there's pros and cons. Like, I think in chiropractic, this is my personal view. You either have to get really big or niche. Somewhere in the middle, and this is part of the reason why we had those practices in there, but it was really dependent on us. We had good systems, but it was still dependent on us. We always had shortage of team and staff, and being in a regional area, we had a problem. So if you're going to have that, you've got to have access to people who can be part of the team. And if there's a shortage or a, a I guess a drought of people available, it's going to impact your capacity to scale.
Hmm.
And so we didn't have the automation skills and tools available now. So right now, if I was going to start from scratch to scale, I'd be leveraging systems, I'd be leveraging automations to make sure the processes got taken care of so that I could be client facing as much as possible and maintain that human connection in as much as possible, because that to me is that's the metric of building relationships and then making sure all your systems support everything that you want to do. We just didn't have that as an opportunity back then. Technology wasn't around, so it was just us. And so we were very dependent on a lot of people to do that. And so consequently, you've got to look at the profitability of that as a model back then. So now there's a lot more, and I'm sure that's right down your alley in terms of the things that you talk about now about profitability and scaling at a level that is profitable but also doable so that you're not exhausted and it's falling onto you. So that's
Hmm.
invariably why we sold out, because we had seven practices. We were in a country town. I was president of the cricket club at that time. So that took a lot. I was involved in Rotary. I was a Rotarian, gave a lot to our community. And we also had a child and a kid who was not going to thrive well in a small town community. He now lives in New York as an entrepreneur. And that was just too small a fish pond,
Yeah.
for him. And so we had to move. And so I came home one day and said to my wife Bettina, I said, "Listen, it's a blessing and a curse when your partner has a skill set that you have as well too, and they won't let you get away with any BS." Because she said, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "I don't know." Well, what if you did know? Well, if I did know, I'd tell you. Okay, but what if you could tell me? I go, "I don't want to be here anymore." And she was like, "How come?" I said, "Well, I feel like I'm too big a fish in a small pond." Um, and she goes, "What are you going to do about that?" And I said, "I think I'm going to call our associate and see if she wants to buy the practices Lock, Stock and Barrel." And she goes, "Okay." So I got on the phone at a time, spoke to our associate Kylie, who loved living in that area. And I said, "Hey, listen, we're looking at moving. Are you interested in buying? I'll give you the first right." She literally, in principle, we sold it within 30 minutes. So our whole, it
But
was,
that wasn't the hard thing. The hard thing was having a partner that is understanding
oh,
and understands um, the bigger family vision and how that
totally.
I think people will
Yeah,
miss that part if we don't double
totally.
click on that.
Because Bettina's also like, uh, the part of the story flips and turns around. And then I do that for her in the latter chapters of this story to date. But Bettina has always been phenomenal in that regard. We've been together from the start, and she was she's been so instrumental because my capacity and skill set is the visionary, the whole energy process. She go, "Okay, let's
Love
go."
that.
And you need complementary. Like people talk about, you've got to be compatible. As honestly, I feel you've got to be have complementary capacities and skills. And like my ability to use my enthusiasm, my raw energy to get going, met with Bettina's capacity to build systems and processes. So there's none of what we have achieved would have been achieved on just my own energy alone. It would have just been, it would have blown up. By the same token, what Bettina appreciated was someone who go, let's try that. Let's focus on this. Let's try and dint the moon, dint the universe. So it was a combination of both. And at the same time, that's what I mean by sometimes she goes, you're not you. What's going on? What's behind the frustration? You're not fulfilled. You're not thriving. You're not happy. What's going on? So we could have those honest conversations as well too.
It was one of my uh, mentors very early in life said that one of the biggest investments in your life, and not as a financial investment, in terms of fulfillment and actually living a life that is worth living for you specifically, is the choice of partner you make.
100%.
It's not the systems you build and the
No,
marketing and the coach you hire. It's
no.
who do I choose to be my partner in crime for the rest of my life?
Yeah, that was a foundational pillar upon everything that we've said, and it actually started in chiropractic college because in second year we were studying, and it was X-ray physics we were studying at the time, and in the early stages of the relationship, we weren't seeing things in the same way, so that led to a quote unquote argument, but it was a really inopportune time because the day before X-ray physics exam, and I could compartmentalize and go, right, I'm going to go, okay, I've got to park this, I'm going to go and study. But Tina's like, no, we're going to resolve this right now. So we spent hours and hours and hours and hours resolving it. Felt fantastic. It was great from a relationship point of view. And so we said, okay, let's start studying now. It would have been 11 o'clock at night. And Bettina managed, we went the exam. Bettina passed the exam. I failed it and I had to resit it. So I haven't forgiven her.
Women are far greater
Yeah.
creatures than
Oh,
us.
just amazing. But it really set the tone for how we do life and our relationship. So it's always our family first. That always has been um, a principle. So any decision had to be value adding or life giving to us as a family, as a unit with our kids. And that was always the pillar and the value structure that we always used to make any decision from. So yeah, I agree totally. The two of us is much stronger, much stronger than any one of us individually could have been.
Yeah, and I wish someone was telling us these things when I was 21 and 20, and these are the real levers in life that make the difference that makes a difference. And
Mm.
with that said, Jim,
Yes, sir.
I'm really enjoying this. We have to do a part two because
Okay.
I think I'm to question three, and I had like 12 questions, but
Okay.
we'll talk about this another time. But what do you internalize? What springs to mind if I say to you the phrase identity before income, especially when it comes to chiropractic space?
Look, that's a great question because um, the first thing that springs to mind is this is not what I do. This is who I am.
It's not what I do,
It's who I am.
it's who I am.
Because identity is about embodying what is sacred to you. And effectively, it's like that's to me, I have to get really, really clear on who I am, what I stand for. And from that place is where I take actions and make decisions that ultimately lead to outcomes and or consequences. So the doing part of it, and I think this is the biggest part for me in my first year of practice was I got the outcome, I got the income, but I didn't do the growth work and focus on what was important to me and what did I compromise to get that outcome. And that I realized was time with my wife. Basically we've only been married a couple of years, and I just had to go dead into that. My health, I compromised. So I ended up because I wasn't training, I wasn't exercising, I ruptured a disc in my low back. I was on the road for 7 days a week. So I compromised my health, and I went back and went, I don't want to do that again, ever. And so to me, that's why identity is really important, because if you're at a certain level, you're going to get a certain level of outcome. If you want to change things, the first thing that in my mind happens, you've got to have an identity upgrade. You've got to upgrade to the identity of the person who has the particular objective outcome, life, whatever it is that you're aspiring to, but you've got to be that first. You got to invest ahead of the curve in yourself, and that is the identity upgrade or the software upgrade in the identity before you can get the outcome.
Wow. But what does that? I so agree with you. And this was a massive game changer for me when before I was thinking about what skill do I need to learn, I
Yep.
started thinking, what does the person that I want to embody do
Yeah.
and how they are?
That's a really good question, because what happens sometimes, and you might have seen it, where if you get a result way ahead of the your upgrade and you don't feel like you caught up enough, or you feel like you're worthy or deserving enough, you're going to find a way to calibrate back to that level. So you're going to self-sabotage,
Self-sabotage.
yeah, and calibrate back to where you feel you belong. So that's why to me the identity is kind of like the step underneath the elevation. Because if you're on a roller coaster, that to me is what isn't in your control. But if you're working on the internal personal work yourself at the same time as your business, so that's why to me they're inseparable. You can't, you can only expand your capacity, your growth up to the level of you expand your own capacity, because that's how you can hold it. Because so many people you hear build huge fortunes and lose them. And sometimes it's because they compromise either one of their own principles, one of their own values, and they're playing roller coaster. And to me, I don't enjoy living that way. So to me, it was always a consolidation of identity. Who do I need to be? Who do I need to be in this moment, facing this challenge? And from there, that's when I'll take action. And hopefully, the outcome of that is, as you said, the reward. But to me, if it was purely not, if it was purely about the income first, there's a whole lot of people in the industry, in the arts, who have achieved the outcome, but they haven't calibrated the person. They've kind of either lost themselves, or they've lost their identity, and consequently that's when they top themselves. They've basically suicided because they hadn't reconciled that. So to me,
Yeah,
it's certainly really important that we focus on that.
love that. And what did Tony Robbins say? Success without fulfillment is
Well, it's basically it's empty. Like he talks
it's the
about,
ultimate failure. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's ultimate failure, and he talks about John Belushi, and he talks about a whole lot of people who had the outcome, but they didn't have the personal fulfillment in themselves, their growth, whatever. What they, sometimes people do the right thing for the wrong reasons and the wrong thing for the right reasons to get to the outcome, but it sometimes compromises who they are as a person in their own identity, and they can't look themselves in the mirror.
Yeah, yeah,
And so
yeah.
consequently, they just go, "I've got this. This should be making me happier, but I can't stand this, and so I'm going to tear it down consciously or subconsciously."
Let me tell you a story because it's exactly what you're talking about, and I want to hear your opinion. But my parents, I've started my first podcast, which was podcasting wasn't even a thing back then. It used to be called the Health Podcast, and I was like, I hope my parents are not listening, but I started it to be like influence my parents' health because they both
Yep.
at the time smoked,
Yep.
and my mum stopped smoking because her identity was hurt.
Mm.
Apparently when I was a kid and she walked in the room and I was like, oh, mom, it smells disgusting. I must have been like, I don't know, 12, 13. She did not smoke for years, dude. There was no nicotine patches she needed, nothing. My dad couldn't care less.
Yep.
My mum probably thought my son is embarrassed of me and he's my golden child.
Yep.
I just think this identity thing is far bigger than people understand it.
It's massive. Yeah, totally. And you know what? That makes sense. And you mentioned Tony Robbins, but he always said that people will always do things to stay consistent with their identity of themselves. So when someone, and I was just talking to someone just recently who's basically trying to change their path towards sobriety and trying to get off addiction to cannabis, right? And what they're using is willpower. And what effectively they're saying is, hey, it's 16 days since I haven't had a smoke or indulge. And you ask them, how do you see yourself? Well, I'm an addict who has not has gone 16 days, right? And if you flip it and say, well, now I'm a non-smoker, you now will have behaviors and actions that are consistent with that identity. So in your mum, if in her mind she goes, I'm a loving, caring mother who always puts my kids first, and you come in and say, hey, mum, you're doing this, in her mind, she's going to go, oh my gosh, my habit or behavior is compromising my kid. And ultimately, my identity or belief about myself, I can't do this anymore.
Love that.
Yeah.
So she didn't identify herself. If I said, Mum, do you fancy a cigarette? She's like, I'm not a smoker. I
Yeah,
don't have to think
correct.
about whether I
That's it.
fancy it or not.
That's it. That's exactly right. Whereas someone who is, they're going, hang on, I'm 70, and that's not making wrong of that.
No,
It's
no.
just, but what happens is when you're tired, when you're worn out, basically, fatigue makes courage of us all, right? So effectively, um, you can't outrun motivation if you're constant. That's the only driving force. There has to be some other component, and identity is a really important part. And then the two key things that we work with is going change your identity and your perception of your own identity and move motivation to inspiration. And when you do that, they're life pulling forces. They pull you along rather than like you talked about running away from earlier. These are moving towards, and it
And it
makes a
becomes,
massive.
yeah, and it becomes this like, okay, but this is a question I have for you, and this wasn't scripted. Do you think identity changes as you evolve through different phases of life based on kids, no kids, clinic, no clinic?
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah, I do. I do. I think fundamentally, who you are at your core, your values. We when we help people get clear on their values, their top two or three values, a lot of them don't change, right? But your identity, like I couldn't, when I wasn't a father, I couldn't relate to being a father, and so the moment that I did, I remember the day, like my oldest son's 30 years old now, and the day he was born, it was like a thunderbolt that came through the sky and went in the forehead and went, I get it, I get life, and I constantly then had to level up to be responsible as a father. And then when I had a second child, I'm thinking I couldn't possibly love my first child anymore. Suddenly there was another chamber that grew in my heart, and I went, oh, there it is for everybody. And so I believe your identity, you can upgrade your identity. You can consistently do that. So I'm now in the fifth decade of my life. I'm 57. I've upgraded my
Are you
identity.
57?
I'm 57.
Dude, you look like at least 10 years younger.
Thank you. Okay, I will now come to the second podcast episode. No, but no, 57 years old. So I'm looking at things through a different lens, right? And so, but I've got to upgrade to me, the stage of life that I'm at is less about me doing it and more about empowering others to find that within themselves. All
Hmm.
right. So that's the part. That's the way we've always modeled and parented our kids was the case of going, hey, I don't want you to dependent on me. How do we help you find your own solutions, your own answers, so that when I'm not here, you're good. All right.
Mm.
So to me, that's a critical part and important. So I've had to constantly keep upgrading. And so particularly as I shifted from different parts of my life, I had to go, okay, well, I'm not doing that anymore. Who am I now? When we moved from Australia to Europe, that was a massive transformation for me to actually go because we'd sold our practices, we were financially independent, didn't have to work. I was at the time I was coaching. We had other bit, but I didn't have to do anything, and I delegated systems to the point where I wasn't needing to do very much at all. My kids didn't need me to provide anymore, so I had to sit in the whole, well, who am I?
Mm. What was
Right?
that like?
Terrifying.
And you were how old at that time?
So I'm talking like 3 years ago, 3 years
Sure.
ago, right?
Wow.
Because fundamentally, right? So when we went from Australia to Barcelona, and the reason why we went to Barcelona, Bettina was invited to help run the Barcelona College of Chiropractic. So that was the whole. We had a phenomenal life in Australia, um, with everything that you could imagine. Conventionally, life tells you is success. Um, but there was an unfulfilled part. of us that went, okay, I was troubled by the number of new grads, people walking away from chiropractic, and going, we have to help them, but not in a way that, it was just something else, So I went, okay, what do we do? And we were seeing graduates, they were coaching with us all the time, but we went, no, we've got to go to the coalface. So when the opportunity came up, we literally just went, right, let's go, let's unpack our whole lives and go to the other side of the world. And so we went to Barcelona, but for me, it meant I couldn't practice, and I wasn't practicing very much by that stage anyway. I couldn't practice. Um, our kids were living in New York and London at the time. They didn't need me to provide for them. Bettina was away 12 hours a day.
I
Uh,
would feel lost.
that's exactly right. That was the pathway. And so what happened is I gave up my identity as the chiropractor, Dr. Jim. All sort of conventional component. I even had to revert back to my birth name, Dimitri, that was my birth name. You talk about another identity shift. I had to go for my passport. So here you had Dimitri in a foreign land at 55, 54. It was like it took me back to the 7-year-old kid who was back in
Yeah, yeah.
Australia, and I had to cycle through that. So anything that wasn't resolved there, I relived, and I had to really work through at that time.
Okay. Wow, what an
Yeah,
amazing
so
story.
Yeah, so for someone who has certainty and a level of confidence in there, that was really tough. That was like I've been a martial artist for a long, long time. Any battle that I fought was nowhere near as terrifying as looking in the mirror or dropping into a pool with no bottom and try and work out who the heck am I? What?
Wow, that's incredible. Well, last time we spoke, I suggested that one of the podcasts that we talked about, and on there they often talk about this. They have big exits for people sometimes in their mid 30s, and they like never have to work again financially.
Yep,
They feel so lost for so
you
long, and
did.
one of the
Yep,
advice they always get given is sit on it for a long time, longer than you think, because you
yep,
don't want to become misaligned with what you stand for now because the old person was driven by pain and I need to prove some money to have financial freedom for my family. You have all that now.
yep,
So what's the drive? Okay, so can you be intentional with changing your identity?
yeah, yeah.
What
You
do
can.
people, how can people even start the process?
So I usually quote Brendan Bouchard,
Yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah.
for people who don't know, is peak performance coach, consultant, runs seminars. He always says for things to change into your life, one of two things has to happen. Either number one, things have to come into your life, or something has got to come out of you, right? So if basically a situation arises that challenges you, you basically get sideswiped by an event, that you had a particular identity, and a life event happens, and you're no longer that person. You got to adapt. So that's when it's outside of your control. But you can decide at any moment, this is what I stand for moving forward, and you can consciously and intentionally design that based on a vision that you have of yourself, a value, a dream, whatever it is. So yeah, you could be the person. How many times do you see people who might have been scallywags, as we say in Australia, or ratbags or troublemakers as kids, like me, who suddenly find a revelation, a realization, a different way of doing life, and then suddenly turn their whole life around, right? It's because they held themselves to a higher standard. They could see themselves, someone else could see the greatness in them that encourages them to step into that. And to me, that's where it's intentional. But you just got to go, I can see it. This is what I'm prepared to do. I'm prepared to step into that.
Wow. Okay. And then that's amazing. And then with through the evolution of your own personal journey and being financially independent, but kind of no one needs you anymore in a
Yeah.
way,
Yeah.
for that particular reason why you started the process in the first place. That leaves us to Lux Consulting,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Yep.
Tell me a bit more about that and
Okay.
what
So,
happened.
so yeah, back about 15 years ago. Um,
Oh, so Lux Consulting didn't start 3, 4 years ago when you guys.
no, 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 no. So, here's the genesis story of that. So, 15 years ago, or actually, a little bit longer, back in 2002, when we sold our practices that I was talking about, we moved back to Melbourne, which was my hometown.
You've had such a life.
I have, I
I have
have.
to
It's
rewatch
it's
this
fun,
podcast just
fun
for
and good.
my.
And so we moved into a country town, and we took over a practice of that was that was run by a chiropractor who was like an amazing life, like a Hall of Famer in terms of chiropractic in Melbourne. He had
Hmm.
every award you could want. And so, long story short, he was looking at retiring. We were looking at buying a practice. And I went and started working with John. And but I struggled. I couldn't work out what was going on, right? I couldn't work out because I couldn't grow a practice beyond a certain point. And I was like, this is ridiculous. I've done this so many times. I've had all these practices. A friend asked me to help him out who was injured, and I was flying, but every time I come into this practice, it wasn't working. And we'd bought this practice, and I'm like, what's going on? So I hired a coach at the time, and he helped me understand that he got to know me about a lot about me, and he giggled and laughed. He goes, you have what's called Sunny syndrome. And I go, what's Sunny syndrome? I've never heard of it before. He goes, Sunny syndrome is when the child in you, he goes, because you have such reverence for your father, because you have such respect like in traditional martial arts, you never want to outshine those people. And so consequently, what you're doing is you're dimming your own light to create respect for them. He goes, you don't have to do that. And the moment that I got that understanding, that's the invisible subluxation that I had in my mind. My practice tripled within like no time.
Sunny
Right?
syndrome.
Sunny syndrome.
I've never heard of that. Thank you for sharing,
I'd
Jim.
never heard of it either until that time, right? And but sometimes it was that the child in me didn't want to out earn my principal, and it came back to
How
my,
did you, what does that look like though? What does that look
oh,
like on a Monday morning you're showing up? What's different?
it you know what it actually it showed up in the way that I wasn't worried about. I could actually be more free and honest. And because I wasn't worried about, oh, how's this going to look to everybody else?
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
Extrapolate it and go, hey, this is how I want to practice. How is everybody else going to think about it? It's like, it's not relevant to that. It's about you being authentically you, right? And so here's the part that really it solved two problems at once, right? Because in that first year of practice, like I said, I smashed it out of the park. But because being a child of an immigrant, right? I had so much guilt around that. I mean, how do you tell your dad who's an immigrant, hey, listen, you know what? Whatever you earned, I earned like 10 times that in my first year of practice. And I didn't know how to deal with that,
Wow.
right? My dad was my mom and dad were very studious and stuff and invested well. So they were financially free in their own right. You know,
And you were close to them? You had good
I
relationship with mom and
was,
dad?
but they've passed away. Um, but yeah, particularly my mum. My mum was the one that facilitated the dreamer. She could actually go, hey,
Anything is possible.
anything's possible. And so from my dad, I got the hard work component and my mum, but mum got the capacity to dream. She's also the Spartan. My mum's the Spartan, and I've got a Spartan tattoo. That's my ancestry. So the fire comes from the Spartans as well. Um,
That's
but
awesome.
I lost my train of thought. So here's the thing. I went then and spoke to my dad after this conversation, after I got clear with the coach. I went, hey, Dad, listen, I just need to clean something up. He goes, I've carried this guilt around how much I earned in my first year, and I know that you never did. And yet they were fortunate. My parents invested in property in Melbourne and it just boomed, right? But that was luck. That was luck because the migrants lived in the inner 4 kilometers of town. And when then every major city, the most expensive real estate is in the central 4 or 5 kilometers of the town, right? But back in when they moved to Australia, that's where all the factories were. And that's where all the migrants bought their houses. And when the factories moved out to the outer suburbs, the property prices could quadrupled, And so that's where luck comes into it, right? Boom.
Circling back the whole story.
Circle back. I'm just circling back. So I went and spoke to my dad and said, "Hey, Dad, listen, I've been carrying all this guilt and shame about this," and he just stopped and looked at me. And goes, "What did you think the move was all about?
Oh, dude,
What did you think it was all about?" He goes,
gonna make
"It
me
was to
cry.
give you an opportunity that we never had, and you taking of it validates that." And I was like, oh, it was a healing moment. I bawled, I cried.
Man.
It was just cathartic. And that was it. And I just moved on from then on. And I could actually be grateful for the sacrifice. And it was a huge one for them at that time. Moving to a country that you don't know, they don't know a soul. And every penny you get, you earn, you send back to the old country to look after your six sisters. until they're married. Like that's what they did. And that's the kind of commitment they had. So that's in me, that drive, that. And so whenever people say, "Hey, you moved countries," whatever, I go, "You don't understand, dude. The backstory, they didn't have internet, they didn't have money, they didn't have language either, but I've got resources that they never had. So to me, it's easy." And that was cathartic. And so that's
You must struggle when you get a chiropractor going, "Oh, I've been asked to work 26 hours this week and I'm getting paid 100K
definitely,
this
I'm
year."
gonna be honest. This is if it wasn't, children watching the podcast, I must admit, I have to just contain myself and go, can I give you a reality check? Can I be honest with you? But that's me cycling through because you don't know what you don't know,
Sure.
right? So that's some of the backstory. I know we went every which way and there's hopefully a central theme. So if we were going to dissect the themes so far, and as you said, I'm sorry we didn't get to
I'm
seven.
sure we can do a part two if there's enough audience requests. Or
Sure.
we might get you back with a different background next time, maybe
Yeah.
in the mountains somewhere or
Yeah, I could do that. I could do that. Okay. So what's the major theme that you've seen that you think that people listening to this may be able to take out of and apply to them in their life and world that would help them in their practice, particularly or their life?
Yeah, I think you've been so valuable. First of all, I thank you so much for being truly authentic that you didn't know one of the questions that I was going to ask you. And people like you are such a valuable asset to the profession and as a person and as a leader because you're clearly speaking from the scar tissue. You're speaking
Mm,
from
mm,
experience. It's not something you read in the textbook. And the thing for me is very clear is in order for you to grow, in order for your outcome to grow, which could be your clinic, your practice, your diary, you have to adopt a different identity before that.
mm, mm.
And I think we can probably go much, much, much deeper on the psychology or the tactics behind it. But how do you guys help people now to where you've evolved with Lux Consulting?
Great. Sorry. So that's the story. Sorry, that was the last part of it.
That's
So
okay.
15 years ago, my coach, I worked with him for a few years, and then he came to me 15 years ago. He said, "Hey, listen, have you ever considered becoming a coach?" And I went, "No, not really." And he goes, I really think, I'd like you to." So we went through the rigid and tough 2 year process. And we joined the organization at the time, which was called Powerful Practices, which at the time was the largest coaching organization in the Southern Hemisphere. There were 8 coaches. As it turned out, we ended up buying the organization. So, and this was all systems procedures based. It was huge in that space, and but then we got to a point where eight years ago, we as a group had gotten big and we couldn't be everything to everybody.
Hmm.
We were
Hmm.
getting requests to do one part and another. And so one of our about 6 years ago, we dissolved the partnership, and one of our partners went to another coaching organization, which is very systems and procedures based, and found his niche. We were getting so many requests from outside of chiropractic, interestingly, from a lot of business people and entrepreneurs who found that hey, whatever you're doing, do you support people out there? And at that time and that model, we didn't. And so I wanted to move into that space. I wanted to do a lot more work, kind of conversations that we're having today is identity-based stuff that then we can bolt on systems to, and irrespective of what industry you worked in, we could help. So that's the pathway Bettina and I moved. And so that's when we formed Lux 6 years ago. And, our clients basically followed us according to who in the organization. One of our other partners wanted to do a lot more retreat work. And so he kind of went along that path. And so we all found our way and people found uh, us in the way that we had. And then over time, we've just evolved that specifically. So while we do a lot of work outside of chiropractic, it's fundamental to chiropractic in that it's inside out. So one of the funny things is that people say, whenever I'm coaching someone who's outside of industry, chiropractic, they go, "How long has this been around for?" I go, "Oh, since 1895." It's just basically just something that a truism that we as chiropractors just take for granted. Some is a lot of people don't know, and a lot of things that I found that people within chiropractic only focus on the very insular community aren't open to ideas outside of industry. And so we were able to bring ideas from many, many other industries into chiropractic, and as a result, help them as well too. So, but fundamental to all that is always identity-based stuff, who you are, what you stand for, and then from there we can give them the tools and strategies that help them support being the best version of themselves. So that's that in a nutshell.
That's amazing. I don't think I can any follow-up questions will devalue the message you've just given to the audience. So I just really personally want to selfishly say thank you for the some of the knowledge gems you've dropped today, sir. We'll see if we can do a part two. Is anything that's, I don't know, how can people reach out to you? Is there anything that you want people to know at all?
Yeah, look, perhaps I can. I'll add some stuff into our communication, and I can pass that on. You know, we what
Brilliant.
we do, um, we're really. I work collaboratively with a lot of people in this industry. I coach a lot of them, and so to me, I'm clear on the area of work that I want to work on, and the particular people that work with us. We pre-qualify. We just got to work out. Sometimes we're not the right fit for them, and we'll let them know. And thankfully, we can let them know that and be okay with that. And we'll find a home for them, and if they're looking for support. But yeah, I'll send you some details in terms of what we do. We
Yes,
run
please, sir.
retreats. We run our specific retreats. We run day events that are very. When I say general, they could be applied to anybody. So they're basically crossover to a whole lot of industries. And then, but our area of joy is particularly in chiropractic. So we want to help people thrive and live amazing lives, particularly as chiropractors, because the more people, more chiropractors that are fantastic and fulfilled in themselves, the more output that they have and the more impact they have in the community and their world. So that's in keeping with our global vision of helping chiropractic.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Jim. What I'll do is I'll put those in the show notes for you guys. Thank you for watching. And once again, I'm sure the listeners will absolutely love what they've experienced today. And we'll look forward to part two. Thanks, guys. And that's the pod.